Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Laura and I am the illustrator and creator behind Laura Jane Illustrations on Instagram, where I aim to create content that helps you feel good about you. Today I am back with another Procreate 101 tutorial where we're going to be taking a closer look at the brushes feature of the app and all of the different capabilities that it has. So let's dive in. So if you watched my first Procreate 101 video, then you'll have a pretty good idea of the layout of the app and where the different things are and how you can find them. Today we're going to be looking at the brushes feature, which is one of kind of the bread and butter functions of the app, because if we don't really know how to use brushes, then we're kind of limiting what we can create within Procreate. So one of the most common questions that I get in terms of brushes and about the brushes that I use on Instagram is, where do I get my brushes? Most of the brushes that I use for my creations on Laura Jane Illustrations are actually the original brushes that come with Procreate when you download the app. However, if you have a specific style that you want digital brushes to support, then there are places that you can download other brushes. Two places that I highly recommend are Creative Market and Etsy. So the next thing about brushes is you can tweak and personalize so much within this app to really create the way that you want to create. And one of the great things about brushes is you can personalize every single brush in your brush library. The first thing that I would recommend if you're about to play with the settings of a brush, especially if it's a brush that you just purchased or downloaded from somewhere, is to duplicate the brush before you play with the settings. So I kind of like to keep an original version of the brush and a duplicated version of the brush. And within my brushes library, I have a separate folder where I keep all of my own personalized brushes. So the main features to think about when you are duplicating a brush to get it to be more personalized for you are streamlining, size, and touch responsiveness or tapering. These are the settings that I play around with the most because it really helps me get a brush that responds to how I draw and create. Streamlining is a great tool to play around with a brush, especially if you're using it for lettering or detailing. The higher you pull the bar up on the streamlining tool, the smoother and less kind of responsive the brush will come. So when you're freehanding things, you get nice smooth lines. This is great for lettering, for example. Another setting to play around with is tapering. Tapering is the end of your brush line. You might want it to be blunt or you might want it to be feathered out. You can also adjust the max and minimum size of a brush. So if you want something that you want to have the option where the brush can be really big on your canvas, or you don't actually want it to have that option, you can play around with what its maximum size will be and what its minimum size can be. There are so many different settings within the brush menu for you to play around with. Some of these settings I haven't even explored because I've just not actually had the need to explore them yet. So it really depends on what you are creating. If you can't find a brush to fit your needs, I highly recommend really exploring the personalization options of the brush menu so that you can learn how to personalize what you have, which is a great foundation to help you later create your own brushes. So next, let's talk about pattern and texture brushes. So a pattern brush is exactly what it says. It's a brush that is developed in a certain way to create a seamless pattern when you use it. For example, a pattern brush that I use a lot is a grid pattern to give the background of my images the effect of being drawn on grid paper. Another alternative to a texture and pattern brush is a shape, or I like to call them a stamp brush. I have stamp brushes of all of the common brand shapes I use in my images. So for example, stars and clouds and hearts. So these are things that I use kind of commonly when creating a post on Instagram, and having a stamp brush of it allows me to kind of quickly fill in detail on my post without having to hand draw everything. I do have an old video here on my channel where I show you how to create your own stamp and pattern brushes. So if you want to go back and have a watch of that to see a little bit closer how to do it. So once you've been using Procreate for a while and you've kind of explored the different settings that brushes have do have, or you've kind of explored what's out there on the brush market in terms of what you can buy and download, you might feel that you want to create your own brushes. This is something that I have done to kind of create brushes that first of all match the style that I'm drawing, but also to create brushes that help me add my branding to whatever I'm creating. The method that I use for creating a brush is kind of similar to what I use when I am personalizing a brush, which is starting with a brush that matches what I want to create and duplicating that. The benefit to this compared to just starting from scratch is you duplicate some of the settings that you don't really want to waste your time setting up. So for example, when you're creating a drawing brush, you might have another drawing brush that you've already nailed the streamlining on and the other settings. The main settings that you want to look at are shape and texture. In these, you can import from the Procreate library a shape that's already there, or you can copy and paste a shape or texture from a canvas directly onto this brush canvas. The brush library will then give you a preview of what this will look like as your brush when it's working. So you might realize when you paste in that shape or that texture that it's too big or too small, or that it's not what you envisioned, and so you can go back and play with it. So the way that I created my stamp brushes is by drawing the shape that I want to be in my stamp on a square canvas. I stretch it up to fit the canvas as much as I can to make sure that there's a minimum amount of empty space around that shape that I'm going to import. I then copy the layer. I go into my brush menu. I duplicate a brush that I already have. I then double tap on that brush and go to its settings. I go to the shape settings, I click on the preview of the shape as I can see it. I then click to import my own shape by pasting it, and then the brush menu will give me a preview of what my shape is going to look like in the brush. Then I sometimes play around with things like the spacing or the jitter. If I would like, for example, a star brush that I can have as a continuous line of stars, I can tweak these settings here to fix it. I can also play with things like randomization. Do I want the shape to turn a different way every time I tap my brush on the canvas, or do I want it consistently to be exactly the same every time I tap it? I can also play with orientation. Do I want the shape to rotate with whichever way I have the canvas turned, or do I want it always to remain upright or the way that it is when I pasted the image in? So there's a really simple way to create a brush. You can also use exactly this same method to create a pattern brush. You just have to put a seamless pattern in the place where you have your shape instead of a simple shape. So as you can see, there is so much to dive into in the Procreate brush library. It's definitely a feature of the app that has so much more to it than meets the eye when you originally click on it. The best thing you can do with any of these settings is to really explore and experiment with them in depth so you can get a feel for what kind of settings that you like your brushes to have and which that you don't. If you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you get reminders when new videos go up. If you have any questions about Procreate or Procreate brushes, make sure you drop them in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. That's all from me on Procreate for today, but I will be back again next week with another Procreate 101 tutorial where we'll be taking a closer look at the colors feature on Procreate. Until then, bye!